Okay, so
Okay.
we have a lot of question from the property owner. The
Yeah.
first one is from David. David, the owner of Casablanca. We give him the content of three important things to understand
Yeah.
about Bali rental market, and then
Correct.
he had a question about this one. And he said, interesting and makes a lot of sense. I am
Mhm.
wondering though if property price have peaked now in Bali, and I wonder if the amount of choice due the amount of building will reduce the rental price and property price, like the overbuilt did in certain of Spain.
Okay.
And he is the leasehold owner of property in Bali, Casablanca,
Of
and
course.
he wanted to see if he can see the gains of the property as well as the rental income in Casablanca, sir.
Okay. So that's an excellent question. I'll do my best to attempt to answer that. Okay. So it seems like what David is asking is essentially what is the value of his property if he were to sell the property, correct? Well, let's go into a deep dive and understand how property markets work and what essentially would be the correct value for the actual asset. So in any particular valuation, there's generally three methods in which you can actually value a property. Okay. So the first method is called a cost and profit. So basically, this is how much it would cost to actually recreate the asset. So if somebody else were to go to that particular location, spend that type of money, invest that much time, lease that land, how much would it cost them to actually go and rebuild Casablanca? Okay. On that valuation, there's good news, okay? Based on that method of valuation, the land price has obviously gone up since David has initially rented the land, or at least the land. That part is secure. The construction costs have obviously also gone up too, as let's say inflation and everything has happened. Okay. And then basically, I would say the time and the space and even the opportunity to rebuild Casablanca is close to zero now. Okay. So, based on that particular method valuation, that would get a pretty high valuation. All right. Probably much more than what David has already paid to actually get into the property market. Okay. Get into this particular market. So, that's what we call the replacement cost. Okay. How much would it cost to rebuild it and then attain a, let's say, a reasonable profit on that particular asset? The second is what we call the market valuation. The market valuation is, all right, so let's look across the market and see what is a comparable property to what David has at the moment and how much is that basically charging for. If we're able to, let's say, scan across and take a look at any of the particular markets right now, okay, for where there are leasehold properties, same number of years, same location, same roughly size, benefit, the whole factor, okay, we can find what the market rate is for David's property. All right. Now, the first and the second do differ, and I'll go into more detail about that. But let's go to the third valuation method. Okay. The third valuation method is what we call discounted cash flow method. What this means is essentially the buyer of David's property is not looking to necessarily buy a property, they're looking to buy a business. So, what they're looking at is essentially what is the cash flow? What exactly does this business provide? So, that's the same way it works if you buy a bond. That's the way it works if you buy, let's say, a particular financial asset that pays a dividend. That's what you're buying. You're buying essentially the cow and the milk, so to speak. Okay. Approaching from that angle, we can calculate essentially what the discounted cash flow value is in David's case by taking a look at how much profit does he make each year, how much revenue, and then what is the projected, let's say, valuation based on that. Okay. That would be for a person looking to buy a business. Let's go into each three of these particular categories. All right. The first category is probably not a lot of people right now are probably going to enter into an oversupplied market. And plus, Bingen is pretty built out. The value of entering the market with building and constructing and leasing right now has essentially diminished quite a lot since David first entered the marketplace. Land prices have gone up. The construction is more difficult. The outcome, if you release the property out for rentals, is also not as sweet as it was, let's say, 2 or 3 years ago. So most likely that first type of valuation isn't going to happen. Okay, there's no possible way that's necessarily going to work out. So then we're left with the valuation 2 and valuation 3. Valuation 2 is the market rate value. The market right now for properties for sale that are leased is extensive. I'll show you how much it is, okay? So I have a feed right now, and I'll use my screen to express this. The largest property sale site right now, the real estate site, is Rooma 123. This is probably the most busy and active marketplace, okay? So if David were to essentially take a look at this marketplace and decide he wanted to put his property here, first thing he would do is he would probably select this to be in English, of which, let's see if I can smart enough to figure out where that is, okay? Let's see where we can find the English button, account, nope. Okay, copy, add, digital. Maybe we need to go into a particular category first. Let's go into digital, okay? And then we're gonna look into digital, and I swear to God, there must be a thing for English. Maybe it's under Explorer? Nope. Okay, Asset Bank, Perusahan. Here, why don't I just go Ruma 123 English? That makes it probably way easier. I feel like that's almost like cheating. Yeah. Okay. So now it's in English, and now we can essentially set the location to Bali. All right. Now, what happens is David can look for something that's, let's say, in his neighborhood, and oh my God. If David is going to essentially be selling his property, he's competing almost against, well, 92,000 properties. That is staggering. That is truly staggering. I think it was 18,000 about 2 months ago. Now it's almost 4 times as many. So it seems like everybody and their mother is looking to offload some property in Bali, okay? That is not good. That is definitely what we would comfortably call an oversupply situation. Now, granted that a lot of this is, let's say, okay, so we probably have to find something in David's size. So he's probably somewhere between, I don't know, 100 to probably 250 square meters. So then he's still looking at about 27,671 properties in the marketplace, okay? So then what else can we do? We can probably look according to price. We can then take a look at the price variance here. And it seems like at the low end, we can find a property for only 800 million. And at the high end, the properties are selling for 20 billion, which is close to $1 million, okay? So most likely, you could see that this distribution is far from being correct. This distribution is far from being correct because you can see it's very top skewed, okay? So there's a lot of objects in this particular category, but there doesn't seem to be any run up here, which is an uneven distribution. And you can see over here, there's probably a lot of people who consider, I'm luxury, I'm special. So they put themselves up at the top of the curve, okay? So practically speaking, let's say if David's targeting probably the majority, if he wants to get in and compete with the biggest set, he would go into somewhere between the 1 billion to 4 billion category, okay? And there's 14,000 objects for that category. So good luck, all right? You're essentially in this category. And there's a lot of variance, as you can see, okay? So the thing that David can do is simply ask himself, what level can he compete? The first thing he can probably eliminate is any off-plan properties, okay? So David does have essentially a property that is not just a off-plan. He has something that is actual. So I'm not sure if you can do this on Rooma 123 to select any particular real properties as opposed to any particular properties that are virtual right now, but he does have a competitive advantage there. But then the other thing is, okay, once you've narrowed it down, then you're still in this particular category of looking at these particular items. Here's the bad news. Every time we come back to this particular property marketplace, what we see is the supply always goes up. The supply keeps on going up. And in that particular regard, okay, if you're going to look for a market valuation of your property, it is going to be very difficult to achieve peak price when you're trying to compete with so many other different objects there, okay? So that's on the second type of valuation. Now, what about the third type? The third type is difficult because there's not a lot of people who are essentially looking to buy a business. But what if David could actually sell this property with essentially the income stream attached to it? Then David's not competing with all these properties that are just being built, that are in residential areas, but he's actually not just selling essentially hardware, he's selling a business. So that potential of that business now is much higher. So now somebody who is coming to look and buy David's property is looking, okay, I get the property and I get the income stream with that property. So David, at this point, if he is essentially seeing a high income stream that's competitive and doing better than all these other properties that are out there in the market for sale that are making no income right now because they're not being in the rental market, you can see clearly some of these are not really ready to be rented out. Then he's already doing far better by positioning himself into a part of the marketplace where he's generating cash flow instead of just having an empty place sitting there that's essentially having time count down on it every day. Okay. So I would say at this point, the peak prices do really depend upon the desirability of the property from either a highly aesthetic point of view in terms of a design or a particular show horse idea that makes it so stunning that somebody will want to buy it, or it has to just make sense from an investment point of view, and somebody needs to be able to value it according to, once again, the business value of that object. Okay. If David were to sell it as a business object, I would say he would attain a unique price in a highly, let's say, competitive category where he is doing better than most of the other competitors. But if he goes in and goes into the dogfight here and fights with places that barely have a pool that's filled, then you're taking your chances, I think, with different categories. Now, Rumor 123 is, of course, not the only site that's selling property. There's, of course, Propertia. There's other property real estate agents that are all selling different prices, but you can also visit these sites from week to week, from month to month. And what you'll tend to notice is a lack of liquidity. So what do I mean by lack of liquidity? There doesn't seem to be anything moving off the marketplace. There's only things arriving onto the marketplace. And the main reason I think this is happening right now is because that everyone's in a hurry to sell. Nobody's in a hurry to buy. And the problem is a lot of people will patiently still wait to essentially find the right buyer. And the reason they're waiting is perhaps that they put a lot of heart and soul into the design, into the furnishing, into the development. It's like their baby. They've essentially put a lot of emotional investment into it. We do see a lot of objects stay on the marketplace for quite some time. And we think that this is probably not your best bet at the moment. Okay. So what I would urge to all our partners is this is solid investment advice. If you go into the market at time everyone's buying and you exit the market when everyone's selling, then you get to pay peak entry prices and receive lowest exit prices, which means that your profits go to null. I would suggest what David can do is wait for a much, much better time to consider selling his property. Right now is not a good time. Now there's going to be a lot of people who are way more desperate than David to sell their properties. These are developers who have hundreds of units. They need to get something sold. They're trapped in between a rock and a hard place, and they need to get some money in because they've been spending so much in construction to bring their properties online. They've got hundreds of units. It is best not to go into the dogfight and fight with people who are desperate to actually get a sale. They will offload their properties for cheap prices. It's hard to compete with them. David's situation is more noble. David's situation has essentially a brand. So why not protect that brand? Allow for the cash flow right now to carry you through the turbulence and then await for a much better time in the marketplace and sell the property then with Bukit Vista's management services for the highest price possible to somebody who is looking to actually invest in a business in Bali. I think that is my best advice, but that's what I see in the marketplace right now. Okay. Hopefully that answered David's question over there on this Ask Me Anything.